Hello, everyone. I'm Stephanie Boozer with CUGC HQ. Welcome to today's Ask Me Anything. I don't want to call it a webinar because it's not really a webinar. It's a discussion and an engaging discussion because I know you guys are all going to participate. So welcome to today's discussion. Our topic is a big one and it could seem really broad, but we'll see where we get today. We're taking all your questions on the future of end user computing for Citrix admins and engineers. So you guys have already sent in a lot of great questions and we have those on hand, but we do welcome you to continue putting questions in as we go, because I know some of you put in your response that you weren't sure yet. So I'm sure you'll have them as we go. But before we get started, I just want to cover a couple of things. First of all, our upcoming Excel event is in Louisville in October. It's our last big Excel year. We've got lots of great content. You can see who our speakers are. We've got Shane Kleiner, CTP. We've got Owen Reynolds, the CTA. And then we have a really great discussion panel set up with some names you probably recognize. There's also a bourbon tasting. This event is open to everyone in CUGC, so we've got travel tips for you. I mean, anybody can come. You don't have to be in Louisville. If you're within driving distance, that's great, but we're happy if you fly too. So definitely check out that event, and hopefully we'll see you in Louisville next month. Also, one other note is that our Women in Tech mentoring program is open right now for applications. They're looking for mentees who want to partner up with some of our Citrix technology experts that are mentors. We've got a really great team of mentors, really great people, and also two companies that are on this call today, Liquidware and Controlla, are sponsors of this program. Thank you for that. It's a really great program. If you're interested in it, I will, in just a little bit, I'll put the link to the application in the chat for you. And please feel free to share that with anyone that you know, any woman working with Citrix at any experience level. So we're happy to have them. Okay, so for today, we are recording the session. So if you have to pop out, no problem. You'll get a link to this tomorrow. Also, just please send your questions through to the question panel. We want to get as many of your questions answered today. I'm sure you've got more great ones, so definitely put those in. And then finally, you'll get a link to a survey later. It's short and anonymous and for CUGC use only. It just helps us plan future content like this. All right, so who's on the webinar with us today? We have our fearless moderator, Steve Greenberg, a CTP Fellow. Hello, Steve. We also have I'll just go in alpha by name. We have Adam Cooperman. He is with Flexible IT. Hi, Adam. We have Jason E. Smith. He is with Liquidware. Hi, Jason. Jason's done a few of those with us. This is really, I think these are really fun, and Jason seems to have a good time, so I'm glad he's back with us today. And then last but not least, we have Joel Stocker with Control Up. Hi, Joel.
Hello.
Hello. All right. Well, I'm going to disappear for a little bit, but I'll be back later to close us out. And now I'm just going to hand things over. Oh, yes, Steve.
Before you disappear, I have a question for you. I see that you're doing bourbon tasting at a Citrix CUGC XL, and I have to ask, is that what some people may not know is that Patrick Kolb and I have traveled the country at CUGC XL events, sneaking bourbon in the middle of my presentation, pouring shots, to the dismay of every venue owner and event coordinator. And now I see a bourbon tasting. I have to ask, did we influence
Well, it's Louisville.
Okay, all right.
But I think that situation was a problem with the venue. They were the ones that came marching out.
I got them in bad trouble, and I eternally apologize.
We'll come to Louisville. All right, Steve, it's all yours.
All right, well, thank you, everybody. As you know, I'm Steve Greenberg. I'm the founder and principal consultant at Thin Client Computing in Scottsdale, Arizona. I'm a CTP Fellow. I get these cool shirts, and I've been deploying Citrix for over 25 years, which is a really long time, and it's kind of amazing how things have changed. When I started, Citrix ran on OS 2. You can laugh, it's fine. and we used serial terminal connections. I'd actually wire DB connectors and modems to connect to these servers. We were running on a Novell network, and the corporate LAN did not have an internet connection because that wasn't a thing. Although in that particular business, we got one very early because we were across the street from a supercomputer center, and we were able to ride on their internet in the early mid 90s. The concepts of what we do today in EUC are really pretty much the same, but the technologies just keep changing. And one of the things in preparing for this that stuck out for me is back in, let's say, the 90s or heading to the 2000s, you'd deploy a technology and it would be good for 5 years. You know, you could learn Novell and stick with it and, you know, go with upgrades and learn the deltas. And that was kind of how IT was. EUC had some products, they would revise, the OS would change, but your basic skill set and your approach would not really change. But that time's been compressing. When we were doing projects in, like, say, the 2000s, it started to be like you had a couple of years, maybe 3 years of using a platform and approach or a standard model. And that's just been compressing and compressing until literally nowadays, virtually every project I do, you know, our projects tend to overlap, but they're pretty much serial throughout the year. Something changes. We have to make architectural decisions, business decisions that are different. The speed of this change is unbelievable. And I think the most important attribute that comes out of that is the ability to adopt change and move and not be tied to your thoughts or your experiences. But this is getting harder and in a sense worse, because we're not even now just dealing with some technologies that change, but we're dealing with public cloud and completely new paradigms, changes of roles and software. And the question is for EUC community, for admins and engineers, you know, where does that leave you? Where do you need to focus and know going forward? So we've got some fantastic gentlemen today. We're going to ask, we're going to take your questions. I have the previous questions that were answered. We're going to weave in, but we'll be watching and trying to, you know, incorporate what you do today. So we'll be talking now, we'll be talking futures, we'll make some predictions, and we're going to ask a combination of questions that were sent in ahead of time, as I said, and questions you can ask. But we're going to practice because I want to see some responses. So the first question that was sent in is, what would Jason be ordering on his pizza for football night? So I'm going to ask Jason to answer that, but while he does, I'd like you to post your favorite pizza for watching sports, and then you'll just get the mechanism of, we're talking, you have a question, pop it in the window. So Jason, the world wants to know about your pizza.
Yeah, I don't know if that's can you hear me? Sound check again. Yeah, good. I don't know if that's attribute to my marketing prowess or my technical prowess that I get a pizza question. So maybe a little of both. There's this pizza that we order, and sometimes when we have kids and their friends over, they're surprised that they love this particular mix, and it's pepperoni and it's jalapeno peppers. The hot and the spicy, the different spicy of the pepperoni, that pizza disappears first, and it had been a surprise to the girls. No one's gonna like that, Dad. They just want cheese or pepperoni, and that one's going like that. So that's the one I would order.
Dad knows best. And Mike in the chat says meat lover. So we're going for some meat today. Maybe spicy and meat is the theme. So that's how it works, guys. You can ask your questions, give your answers, give your comments in the chat. Thank you for that, Jason. I'll try that one next time. And now I'm going to go around the room here. I think we'll start with Joel, because on my screen, you know, he's on the top left. But I'm going to ask you what you think for today now. Looking at today, and we're going to level set and look out in the future and come back around. What do you think are the key skill sets to be an ECU admin or engineer today to be successful? And feel free to comment on trends or other aspects of the current EUC system, you know, environment. There may be other things that you want to throw in there. But Joel, you're up first.
Yeah, I mean, it's so the question today for me probably started two and a half years ago, when all of a sudden, you know, the way we had to serve the end users completely changed overnight, right? All of a sudden, everybody was home, and that brought in basically overnight all kinds of new technologies. And that could have been like, okay, we're going to expand to the cloud. You know, suddenly we got like Zoom and Teams, and you know, all these technologies got rolled out without actually thinking about hey, let's do a project, right? We just didn't have the time. We couldn't say like, oh, let's plan for this 3 months and then we'll roll it out. And then we think about things like monitoring and integration. And is this going to perform well in VDI or in DAS? And I think that's kind of like where we are today. We're kind of catching up with what started a couple of years ago. And and I've seen this like with when talking to our customers as well, that now they're coming to this realization like, hey, we implemented all this new technology in Citrix virtual apps and desktops or Citrix DAS, and what now, right? Well, now we're actually going to properly plan for how we are going to kind of like address this. And I think for EUC admins, this means that they need to get really close to other teams in the organization. For example, the people who provide Teams and VoIP services to the desktop team. So I think that is kind of like where I see a lot of changes happening, which is happening today, but it's kind of like started a couple of years ago.
That's excellent, Joel. And it reminded me about a year ago at this time, we were on a similar webinar, and I granted the community the Hold My Beer Award, because when COVID hit, if you already were an EUC expert or a Citrix customer, or you had this in place, it was kind of like hold my beer, let me get some licenses, right? But there were many disruptions, and I think your point is excellent, that a lot of things had to happen quickly without foresight. That's excellent insight. I'm glad I made it wider because I like the way you included that. All right, Jason, you're up next. We know your pizza preference, but tell us what you see today in EUC in terms of skills, requirements, and any other observations.
I would also go to a couple years ago. If there's anything that taught where we learned a lesson, it was that we need to be prepared for anything. And I like you've been in the space, albeit partly and a little bit more on the marketing side since the early 90s. And I do remember the OS2 and the early versions of the way Citrix was run, and also I did some work for one of the first Citrix Ready partners. They didn't call it that. There was a modem sharing company, Spartacom, and then there was another one that was based out in Arizona. I can't think of the other one. Landfax, Windport, I don't know. So it goes way back to that. And but actually, I was going to make a go at marketing in the theme park business. And one of the big things that we studied, and I studied when I thought I would make a go with, before I realized you can't make a lot of money in the theme park business. But while I was working in it, we had a crisis management book that we had to review every year, because things can go wrong and unfortunately sometimes do go wrong, that you have to go to if this scenario happens or that scenario happens, God forbid an accident or something like that. 2 years ago, this industry faced the same thing. And there was a week and a half where people didn't know what end was up. And I have to include liquidware in that. We had this term adaptive before that. Before the crisis, that we were helping companies adapt to whatever they wanted to go to or had to go to, as we now would say it, to keep users productive. And then we saw that playing out in real time. And when we saw the world sort of shutting down for those few weeks, trying to figure out what to do, at liquidware too, we're like, the economy is coming to a screeching halt. Is liquidware also, you start to think about your own business. Are we also in trouble here? And then we said, look, if we have faith in anything that we've talked about and helping companies become adaptive, this is our time to shine. And so helping companies be adaptive is one thing, but going back to the heart of the question is that you have to have a crisis management plan, and people may have not thought about that, a business continuity plan for your business, and you have to think about these scenarios as they go through. And are you too coupled to one technology to where if something were to happen tomorrow to that, can you make sure your users are productive? Because after all, they are the front line and why we're in business or even have a job as admins. So having that flexibility and that forethought and that planning now is a must in this industry like never before, because if things don't go right when the world changes, your job is on the line or your business is on the line. So it's one of the most important things that you can think for and plan for, I think.
Fantastic, guys. Not the answers I expected. I love that. Okay, Adam, let's see where you're going to go with this, kind of the current state of things, admins, engineers, Citrix skills, EUC.
Don't worry, I caught it quick enough.
I used to do that every meeting. That's okay. You fulfilled the requirement.
Yeah, well, that was a funny thing about COVID, because even after COVID-19, what, 3 years or is it now or something like that, no one's still found the mute button even after all that time, right? Everyone's still searching for it. And I think the important thing to build on the messaging from the other guys is about adaptation. Like, I worked for Citrix at the time when COVID hit, right? Let's use the word as such. And we didn't really skip a beat, because it was just like, oh, we work from home now. We work from home half the time anyway. And a lot of customers really sort of turned up and said, actually, we need licenses now. It was a good time to work at Citrix. And we were joking about what drove your digital transformation. Was it the CISO, the CIO, the CEO, or COVID-19? And for the most part, it was COVID-19. And the companies that refused to adapt were the ones that we saw failing, or the ones that reacted slowly. And I think a lot of the time, there's a great book by a guy called Safi Bahol, and he talks about life at the freezing point of water. If anyone's interested, it's called Loonshots. And he talks about, you always have to be adaptable enough to flow like water, but you have to be regimented enough to have a structure and a process to be able to follow. And I think that's really key. People get locked in a particular mindset or a particular idea or a particular way of doing things. And in actual fact, when something like that comes up, you have to have process and you have to have structure, but you also have to be able to live in both worlds. And it was the companies that adapted quickly and changed quickly that really succeeded. And sometimes that means adopting a new skill set. Sometimes that means looking at the way that your business operated. And I think Joel operates, and I think Joel touched on it earlier about the skill set. And I talk a lot about the value chain of a business. And when I was at Citrix, I walked in with Red Bull, and obviously we sponsored them, and the Citrix still do. And he said, how are you going to make the car go faster? This guy who was the head of innovation and strategy. And you walk in and you're like, I'm a VDI guy. Like, how do I make the car go faster? Like, I can't do that. But actually, if you look at the value chain of what they do, they get data from the car. They run desktops at trackside, which means they don't have to transmit it back to Milton Keynes in the UK, which means that they can access that data quickly and make tweaks to the car on trackside using 600 people at head office. And to steal that story is actually, if you look at the value chain of a business and you apply technical ability to that, technical ability and technical know-how to a business problem, that's where you become absolutely indisposable to an organization. And it's those skills that people forget about. And it was the book Loonshots that really reminded me how important it is to, a lot of the time you can't see the wood for the trees. And now what I always try and do is think of it like a firefighter. Like, well, actually that can burn, we don't need to do this, we can do this, and work out what are the most important things, the most pressing things, and what actually drives the value. Because when you look at a company's value chain, there's usually only one or two things that's really, really important to that company's survival, or things like patient care in a hospital, or in the case of Red Bull, making the car go faster. And relating those two, I would say, is the most important skill for EUC engineers.
Very interesting. All three of you kind of had themes around adaptation and skill, and looking at the conditions and readiness, looking ahead. And I agree, that's what the rapid changes require. You have to have that open mindset of willingness to change and look broader outside your little, your little kingdom. Fantastic. So now we're going to
actually, Steve, just to kind of like comment on that. So I think that the being open-minded about end users also changed, right? So I think that in the IT admin space, right, no matter if it's like EUC or something server infrastructure, right, we tend to kind of like try to avoid talking to the end user, right, because that normally means there's some kind of issue. And when COVID hit, right, before that, right, for many customers, remote work was still kind of like the exception, right? So if you were working remotely and you had some kind of issue, right, like, well, bad luck, right? On my side, everything looks green. That's a you problem. With suddenly 100% of the people working remotely, that was no longer a valid answer. And kind of like meeting the needs of the end users, of all your end users, right, had to be kind of like, was also a shift in how you kind of like react and talk to your end users. I mean, I was talking to a customer just 2 weeks ago. You know what they did when everybody started working from home and everybody was complaining about the performance? They literally ordered 1,000 Cat6 cables and sent them to people's home so they could hardwire into their router. A little bit of an extreme example, but like being adaptive and creative, right, is a part of addressing this, in my opinion.
That's fantastic. Thank you. This is exciting. Not what I expected to hear. Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, just to add something to that, there's a really technical audience here. All right, we're all techies. We've all worked in this world for a very long time. We don't spend a lot of time with users because we're always buried in consoles and admins and the next project and firefighting. But how many times a day or a week or a month do you walk past a user and look at something and go, you do that like that? And you sit there and you go, actually, I've got a way that's 10 times simpler and 10 times easier. Now, imagine if every single one of us actually went and acted on those little things that we see day to day, day in and day out. It's like when your mum opens like a browser to open another browser to then open Google to then type something in, or you know, that kind of thing. And it's like, did you know you can just do this or you can just do that? Imagine if all of us went out there and started fixing those little things. I'd be really, I mean, it's blue sky thinking, what would actually happen? What would the impact of that be across the organizations that we work in? It's just a
Well, fantastic. And what I want to point out is I asked the guys with a bunch of technical industry background, you know, where we're at, and it's really about approach and attitude. And I think that's what the modern technology, the pandemic, our current conditions speak to as a mindset. And we're going to dive into things. It's not that we're avoiding tech, it's that really is the most important thing. And then you plug in the tech that you need. That's great, gentlemen. I'm going to jump to one of the audience questions. Asking what changes in the market do you see in the OS space for desktops and applications over the next 5 years? Will Windows continue to be a player? And I'm going to go backwards on my screen to start with here.
Is this me or is this Steve?
Oh no, I think we've lost the host.
This one. Your thoughts on OSs and prevalence in the marketplace, or maybe even the.
Oh, I think he's gone.
Okay.
He was saying our thoughts on of OSs on the marketplace in the next 5 years. So
yeah, go.
Yeah, while he tunes in, I guess we can banter about. Yep, I think we got it though. Steve's back. No, we can't hear you.
I think so. I am hardwired, but I am.
Well, there's a little bit of latency. It'll probably catch up in a minute. The so it's that question's interesting. We looked at Liquidware. We were looking and forecasting and pontificating where the market was going to go. And I think about, I've been here since 2009. That was the first year. So in about 2010 or 11, we're like, you know, what's the runway for Windows? And we said, you know, applications still are the heartbeat of the user and what they use to be productive. And we believe, you know, I thought at the time and hypothesized that around 2020 or so, that apps wouldn't be as important as they were. Boy, I was wrong. We still live in an app-centric world today. And I think in 5 years, we'll be surprised at how many of these legacy apps are still around. You just have too many industries that are built around these apps. Now, there has been significant progress made with SaaS apps, and some of our users, you know, spend all day in Salesforce.com or whatever, and they don't ever open up anything else other than M365 apps or things like that. But the world is changing even for M365 and how and where you can run it and things like that. But I do think in 5 years the picture will continue to evolve. There'll be more SaaS apps out there than there are even today. There'll be less reliance on Windows apps, but it's going to be a hard habit for the entire industry to kick, you know, technology industry to kick, but the specific vertical industries as well, shipping, manufacturing, and even the finance industry. A lot of them love their apps, and they're not going to be ported even in 5 years to be able to be a pure SaaS app. So you'll still need Windows running somewhere to provide those apps to you. So that could be app publishing 5 years from now, and we're no longer hooked to a particular desktop. But that's a view into, I think that we're still going to have apps around in 5 years that are going to cause a lot of these technologies to remain relevant.
You guys see and hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, because I was you the whole time, but for some reason I went away. Great answer, Jason. Anybody else have a same or different view? It will my screen rearranged. I think Jason picked up with it, so we'll go to Joel this time.
Yeah, so I think you make a very good point. So I worked a long time for Citrix. I started in 2001 as a sales engineer in the Netherlands, and this was when we still had to sell the concept of server-based computing, as we called it back then. And you would come into customers and they say, you know, everything's going to web apps. In a few years, we don't need like like server-based computing, right? So we're not going to invest, and obviously that was completely wrong. But obviously SaaS, I mean, we didn't call it SaaS apps, but yeah, SaaS apps have just made it more complex, right? We're getting new type of apps or more apps, right? Now we still have our legacy apps. Now we're having SaaS apps and web apps and platforms and teams and all those kind of things. Now, looking forward, and this might not necessarily be 5 years, but when you look at things like the metaverse, right? Does the metaverse become, in a way, an operating system to consume applications? And I don't think that is a 5-year thing. That will probably be longer, but you will see these new types of technologies that are not traditional device with an operating system, with an application, you know, kind of coming into the picture. So I don't see it coming easier and simpler. I just see it becoming more complex and more diverse.
Interesting. Adam, what's your take?
It's a really interesting market that we are in at the moment. I mean, I did some work with a company that did credit card transactions, and they use big IBM mainframes, all right? And there's a reason all the airlines often use green screens and all of this kind of stuff, because when you really don't want something to fall out of the sky, you probably want it air gapped, or you probably want it completely sealed and that kind of thing. And I think that we're seeing this, we're learning a real big lesson about security at the moment. All right, we used to have traditionally all your data in your data center, you had 4 walls around it, you had a VPN that was highly secured in one point. And then now you look at somebody's firewall and it looks like a pincushion, all right, because they have so many apps, so many different things that they access. And you can't just close down everything the way you used to, because you have to allow all these things from Microsoft that are trusted source and all these different servers. And we talk about like zero trust, but what we end up with is something that's this enormously complex pincushion of a spaghetti monster of a security practice. And I think we've just lost some of the basics. Like, actually stick 4 walls around it. Like my bank, I don't particularly want a cloud-based bank. I use Monzo in the UK, which is a fintech, all right? That's had some downtime, some problems with the app. My other bank, I've never had a problem with it. And they're old school. Their app is horrible, but it's some green screen thing sat in a basement, probably running on IBM and Oracle. And I think sometimes we forget, like, if you look at what Netflix did with chaos engineering, so I don't know if you know the whole story behind chaos engineering, but Netflix had to create something when they moved to AWS that would destroy random services in their code so that they could test for failure, because the cloud is so unreliable by its nature. And we're still learning this stuff, and it's so complicated, and the learning curve is so steep. And we used to have 3 apps, now we've got 200 apps, and we're wondering how we secure them. And then when we look at the market as a big picture and we kind of zoom out, hardware is getting smaller. Everyone's gone to the cloud because you have that scale, but I'm speccing servers out with 128 cores in 1U, all right? And then we look at 5G getting better and Starlink being available everywhere, and people talking about using Starlink to deliver Azure data centers with the article that I saw today where Microsoft has tightened that network. And then the other thing, if we look at the economic situation, power's getting more expensive. What's going to happen to cloud costs? And then we look at the cycles that we've seen over the history. You were talking about OS2 and token ring networks, and we talk about the cycles of centralization and decentralization. These are the themes that stick with me about what's going to happen over the next 5 years. But if you're asking me what do I think is going to happen, I have no idea. Absolutely no idea. I just think these are the things that are going to affect it, is people are going to get a reality check on cybersecurity, that we can't have all this freedom and all this SaaS and all of this kind of stuff without having security issues, and that hardware is getting smaller, connectivity is getting better, and power is getting more expensive.
Wow, well, fantastic. These are so not the answers I expected. I am loving this. So one observation I want to make, that in my long career at this point, is that good technologies don't ever seem to go away. They just move to the back of the data center, right? It doesn't seem like you ever get a replacement, truly, of something that existed before. As you said, airlines run on mainframes, and mainframe is a pretty strong business today. It's still used for logistics and major international corporations all the time. Where did that go? The story was client server would replace it. It seems like we always just add things on, honestly, and then maybe the market share changes, right? I want to bring up a fun quote from Sean Bass, and I have to ask him if he still believes this. This is quite a few years ago, but he said a famous quote, I think it was a Bryform presentation. after the nuclear holocaust, there will still be cockroaches and Windows, right? So that's just something to contemplate. Is Windows eternal? But having said that, by the way, John Bryant made a comment when we were talking about the cables. He said, "Someone quick send 1,000 network cables out." That's very funny. Is that example?
It's a real story. I picked it up at a big conference, which shall not be named, but that was a story that I was told over there. Yeah.
And a little comment from Matt Silva. I think Microsoft will drive the future of Windows apps. For instance, they are hell-bent on taking Office apps off on-prem server OS. Thanks for bringing this up. We have that theme in the questions as well. They made multi-user Windows 10 and Azure exclusive. Excellent point. These are real factors in decisions and skills and what you plan to do. Every time I talk to a Citrix sales rep, they want to showcase SaaS apps in Workspace because they know Microsoft is gunning for XenApp. Yeah, we'll have to see how that works out. This dynamic has been going on a very long time, and as Adam said, cycles come and go. But any comments on that before we move on? Some pretty interesting statements and questions.
Yeah, one comment maybe about Windows. So first of all, yes, Windows will still be around after the nuclear holocaust, I think. It will just look a little bit different, I think. The interesting thing is that Microsoft kind of like changed the way they look at cloud-hosted Windows, right? No matter if it's AVD or Windows 365, and they now consider it internally as Windows, right? Windows desktop operating system was a separate thing from their virtualization approach. That is no longer the case. So I think you will see a shift in how Microsoft will kind of like deliver Windows, right, as a checked out VM on a Windows desktop, preferably, right? But you will see that Windows will remain. I think a few years ago it was all about, well, the next generation, they all want iOS and Mac OS and like cool. And I don't think that's, I mean, yes, it changed a little bit, but I still think in the enterprise, Windows will be the dominant platform of choice.
Okay, but let me zoom in on that a little bit, because within here is a subtlety about, he mentions on-prem server OS and which platforms Office 365 is supported on. Do you think that maybe in the more midterm, short term, let's forget the nuclear holocaust scenario, many, many years from now, but do you think there is or should be, getting back to guidance for attendees, skills and focus, do you think that the people should be sort of moving towards the desktop OS versus the shared server OS? And I ask that because there are pressures on the server OS that are, that are new. What's available on it? What's supported?
Even I think we should restate, because there may be some people that don't know about M365 apps, that Microsoft has put out a support statement. Back in July, I believe. There's an article. This is what I could find when I went to find the root of it. The M365.
For anybody who doesn't know what we're referring to, Jason, if you can update us.
Yeah, so sometime, I think it was in July, and I'm looking at it on that right now on their website. I pulled it up earlier today when I saw this question come in. So I was up on it a little bit. I had heard this, but I wanted to see the specifics. M365 apps, and the panel can trust me on that or verify on that. That's Office 365 and Office 365. So M365 and Office 365 wouldn't be available on the server version, and we're all used to that in the Citrix world. XenApp, aka virtual apps, and it runs on the server versions, 2012, 16, etc. They won't be able to run M365 apps after an upcoming point in time, which looks like security updates, for example, for M365 apps, and that really tells you the end of support, because nobody wants to run something that's not secure. January 10th of 2023, that's coming up quick, where security updates for version 2002 of M365 apps. So there's some specifics in there. You might be supported a little bit longer. You have to go and look at it yourself, but these things are coming to a head very fast. And we all know and love server-based computing. I still call it that. You brought that term earlier. And we're having to think outside of that. So what's the replacement for that? Your mind immediately goes to, and that is Windows 10 multi-session, Windows 11 multi-session. But then there's the requirement on that again, please verify other panelists, that you have to run that only on Azure. Is what I said correct, or does anybody understand it differently?
I think that is correct, although I did see a tweet the other day, something about no, Microsoft 365 will still be supported on the server OS, but I might have misread that. This was one of those things. It came up last week on Twitter, I think, that there might have been some changes, but I do believe that Microsoft is pushing for multi Windows 10, Windows 11, over a shared server OS.
And then that support model will change. It also may be gauging customer feedback and insistence. But I do think with or without that, we'll verify and we'll all have to get updated on it.
I put the Microsoft link in the window so Stephanie can put it out to the audience, so we're not going off my date. So look into this yourself, but these are some of the dates I'm seeing. At least some of the security updates are coming up soon.
You can then repost that. That'd be great. But you are seeing a reluctance in support. I mean, even FS Logix on the newer server OSs seems to have some issues in our deployments, right? And that's sort of a lack of integration testing and validation. So let me turn this into a question of, we've seen VDI emerge. We've seen the industry relabel it VDI. This came up in a meeting yesterday with Adam. He was talking about VDI and the customer said, I just want to clarify, we're using server-based. The industry has sort of owned this term and just called it all VDI and sort of made server-based less, priority. So going back to the theme of Citrix admins and engineers, what should they know? Do you guys think if you're on server-based, you should be moving to desktop OS, stay where you are, it's fine? Are there concerns? Are there benefits? What are your thoughts on that?
So this is a really interesting one. So I think there's a really simple piece that you can do around why didn't people use VDI? And why do people use VDI or server-based computing or server-based computing versus VDI? And usually, traditionally, it was always a cost thing, right? VDI is more expensive, all right? Server-based computing makes more efficient use of CPUs because you don't run multiple operating systems.
Right.
And it was a very simple one. It was like, can you afford VDI? Are your users demanding enough for VDI? You go to a legal firm where they earn millions and millions, they use VDI. And in the call center where they've got people saying, hi, do you need insurance or something? They're using server-based computing, all right? Because it's cheaper. And I think when we talk about this kind of market, and we also look to things like containers, right? I mean, server-based computing, I don't care if it goes away, so long as we still have some level of multi-session. It's about efficiency of VDI for me. And basically what we're doing is using apps, right? In an ideal world, I would run one operating system, okay? And I would have multiple desktops using one kernel, but I would be able to resource structure them in a similar manner to the way that I would with a true VDI, where we've got rigid structures in between the different users' performance boundaries. That would be the dream for me because it doesn't mean multiple operating systems. The other things that we're starting to see in the app world, and I think Microsoft run a real danger here of kind of flying too close to the sun, is there is very little in Office that I really use that much, all right? I use Teams, all right? I write the odd Word document, I do some PowerPoint presentations, and I use Outlook. And most of those things these days can be replaced fairly easily by 4 or 5 different components. And when you really engage, and I love Microsoft, I made a career out of Microsoft, when you really engage in the Microsoft ecosystem, doing some things is really cumbersome, really, really cumbersome. We recently tried to do some work with Power Automate. It turned out to be a nightmare to actually get it how we wanted it. So if they start to force everyone into this ecosystem too hard and they push everyone too hard, what's actually going to happen, and when is that response? Are they unchallengeable in this space and they can just do what they want? Or are what we're seeing with the statements around the VDI add-on licensing that was last week, the week before, where we're seeing actually they're saying, okay, fine, you don't need an add-on license, we're not going to punish you for using that. And actually maybe the server-based computing extension of support for a little while is them actually starting to say, actually, we're going to have to support this. And I come back to what I said at the beginning is, I think there's actually a better way, and maybe the Windows 10 multi-session could be the beginning of them engineering containerized, almost Dockerized desktops for people, where we can use one kernel, but we can share resources in a fair share manner that allows organizations to run effective server-based computing like efficient VDIs while also giving the performance benefits of actual VDI.
I got to tell you a funny story, Adam. I pitched that to Microsoft. I was an MVP 2008, 2009. 2009, I did a presentation pitching exactly what you just said, containerization for efficiency and isolation. I wasn't asked back. But I think they're going to come to that. They're going to come to that. That is the computer science logical conclusion if you look at all of the constraints. So
it's going to be interesting to see if Amazon and Google remain silent with all this too, because if only Windows 10 or Windows 11 it can multi-session can run on Azure, and then they're doing away with the server versions, right? At least the ability of M365 apps to run on server versions, you're severely limiting what can be done outside of the Microsoft ecosystem at all. And we go back to the year 2000 when we saw all this happen with the Internet Explorer and things like that. That are they being too heavy-handed? All those things will have to be answered by the community, by the biggest players in cloud, to see if they remain silent or if they do change some of these dates or open them up, because that's happened before as well.
Yeah,
and it's important to say M365 apps. So they're not saying you can't do multi-session the way I read it, but they're saying one of the most important things that a lot of people think of Windows for, M365 apps, you wouldn't be able to run those fat apps on server versions anymore.
So yeah, one of the things that Microsoft maybe, right, because I do see that there could be like Google with their app suite, right, kind of like jumping in this gap which might be left behind, but maybe Microsoft is kind of like thinking that this shift of really kind of like, you run everything yourself, right, in your own data center, maybe in your own cloud and things like that. But no, we are going to a fully subscription-based world. So who cares if that's Windows 10 multi-user or server platform? You just pay me $20 a month, right? And I'll give you whatever I want, and you got everything in there. And I think that might be what Microsoft is more kind of like thinking as far as the direction. Because I do think that customers are starting to look at the cost of running this stuff themselves in a different way. With climate change conferences like COP26, right, there will be new requirements for organizations to report on the cost of running their own data centers, right? What does it cost? What is the impact on the environment? You know what the solution is? Not have a data center, right? Then I don't have to report on anything. I just say, go ask Microsoft. And so I'm wondering if Microsoft is maybe looking at it like that, right? Like, hey, at the end of the day, if it's server or multi or VDI or DAS or whatever you call it, doesn't matter. You just say, I'll pay you $20. Here's a bunch of apps that might be running on a virtual desktop.
Well, that's where they may be a little heavy-handed, and Adam said flying a little too close to the sun. If you put too much pressure in that direction, I do a lot of critical systems, like literally nuclear power plants, 24/7 hospitals, things like that. They cannot run on the cloud because the SLA is not there. And I've got companies that went cloud first because they insisted because of their philosophy. And they did have some critical monitoring. It wasn't life and death, but they had critical monitoring capabilities interacting with customers. I don't want to give more information. And the level of service they got from the cloud just wasn't sufficient. So it isn't really there. It's really like 3 nines if you're lucky, 3 nines and a shave a little more. And that there's a lot of use cases that does not apply to. I wanted to take some questions and feedback from the group. We have Matt, Gary, and Brian all kind of commenting on somewhat related things. The whole area of, this is for Citrix admins and engineers. What should they be thinking about, recommending, investigating? The pressure is on. They're hearing a lot of like, hey, I want to move to AVD. I want to cut my Citrix costs. I'll just throw out there, as a hands-on practitioner, I don't see a savings with that move. The cloud costs are pretty expensive, and I'm generally seeing performance drops. So I just want to say that. Why I like Citrix Cloud so much is when you go to Citrix Cloud, the cloud is really the backplane, and they support wherever you want to run your workload. Your VDA can be anywhere. It can be up in Azure, but it can be on-prem, it can be in a colo. And I find that Citrix Cloud, to me, if you have to be cloud, is really the best way, because the control plane is the benefit of the shared infrastructure, but the workload is where you put it. But so some of the things that a lot of customers want to go to AVD, also seen a lot of users who want to run containers natively in Azure. Do you think Citrix will struggle as a result of this? I'll add to it. What would your guidance be to admins and engineers? What should they be thinking about and looking at here? And I'll go to Adam because I know he has a lot of experience on this.
I don't know about experience. I'm not as technical as when I was hands-on, but I always talk about cloud appropriate, and I think this is running on from that theme. And like you say, the hybrid cloud world of Citrix Cloud is the right way to be, because actually, if Citrix Cloud disappears now today with Citrix Cloud, not in the early days, you're fine. It doesn't affect you. All right, you don't see any downtime as long as it's designed and deployed right. But like you said about critical environments and things like that, you shouldn't go to the cloud for those. All right, you shouldn't go to the cloud for anything that important. And I think one of the things that this actually made me genuinely really angry. And this was Microsoft's model of when they were selling everyone on the vision of Azure. It was all sold on 3-year server replacements. So every 3 years you replace your servers. And if you put it into their own TCO and ROI calculators and you say run your own data center, all the savings is in operations. And we all know how ropey some of that stuff can be. And then what was it last month? Microsoft announced that actually they're keeping all their servers for 6 years. So they've pushed people into cloud on a cost model and a reliability model and scalability model. Now, that doesn't mean that cloud isn't awesome, all right? I'm a big cloud advocate, but at the same time, you need to cut away from all of this vendor fluff that people are telling you and actually just go and test it. Go and try the technology, see what it does, test the reliability of it, see how it works, see if it actually fits your use case. Because there's a lot of people, and I don't want to point fingers, but selling snake oil in the market at the moment about what will and won't work and what can and can't do. And I think you really just have to dive into it. I've seen huge downtimes on Azure. We've seen times when you couldn't get a particular VM series. Now imagine you hit DR and your VM series isn't available, or you've got an issue with your subscription limits or something like that. These are huge issues with cloud. But that shouldn't undermine the huge value that cloud has in terms of scalability, flexibility, feature availability. Just keep it away from operating theaters and nuclear power plants and things like that, because it's not appropriate and it doesn't belong there. And I really wish vendors would just take a chill pill and just say, actually, fair enough. Like, you can run that on-prem. Like, please, can we start valuing lives and infrastructure over profits of cloud?
Great insight, Joel. Let's go. You seem pretty riled up.
I mean, I don't totally disagree, but when you say I couldn't get my type of VM provision, when you're doing on-prem, right, especially over the last few years when we had all the supply issues, you probably ran into the same situation, right? I couldn't get my physical server. So, you know, I think there's some truth in both of that. But one of the things you highlight is 3 years versus 6 years. I do notice a lot of customers, they start to move away from this kind of traditional 3-year hardware refresh cycle, right? No matter if it's on the desktop side or on the server side, and that has to do with supply chain, it has to do with the environment, it has to do with just money, right? The economy, and yeah, I think that there's an opportunity for all the EUC engineers as well. Is well, how are we going to actually measure, when hardware needs to be replaced? And for me, and this might be a little bit like, because I'm with Controller, but measuring the experience of a user, right? Having some kind of value to how the user experiences services and being able to track that over time, right? That is going to help you determine when you need to make a change, right? At our company even, right? We get like every 3 years, we get like a new laptop. When I started, I said, I don't need a new laptop. I have plenty of hardware. I just got my first. I probably don't need a new one in 3 years. But if my app's becoming slow, or if things are just not working the right way, it could even be my Wi-Fi needs to be replaced, right? So I do think that I've seen in conversation with customers a shift to go away from this kind of like traditional hardware refresh cycle to more flexible means.
Okay.
On the thought of Citrix, and we've all heard the old adage, nobody got fired for buying IBM, right? Or for licensing this from IBM. They're the leader in the space, and that's where we find Citrix in the market. They're the leader for a reason. They innovated in the space. the largest enterprises in the world run them. Yes, VMware's got Horizon out there. Yeah, we've seen some other players come up with workspaces from Amazon and some others, but they are the leader in this space for a reason. They're going to go through this acquisition, you know, and be from Vista Partners and Elliott. It looks like it'll go through. It's their space to keep leading in. You know, some people would say their space to lose. I'd say it's their space to keep leading in. And I get on an airplane and I fly out. You know, I flew out to a trade show that some of us were at a couple of weeks ago, and I trust in that airplane, and that airplane's going to get me there. I'm not going to walk. I'm not going to drive. I'm going to ride in the airplane. But I know where the exit door is, and I know where the emergency raft could be if we had to land on water, and I know that the life vest is under my seat. And I think that's, you know, where a lot of people need to keep in mind is that there's a lot of changes taking place in the industry. You shouldn't take your eye off of Citrix for its long-standing leadership and how it's got you where you are, but you should know what your options are. It's only smart for any admin to do that.
I agree, Jason, very much. I'm glad you brought that up because I had that in my notes to say as well, because I live this every day where I have to perform, I have to deliver. The user has to be able to do what they're doing, and Citrix really does consistently deliver the experience. I think also in a lot of what I'm seeing in the discussion and in the questions, it's a funny thing. I'm not quite sure how to say this, but you also have to get rid of the mystery and just look at your needs factually. For example, if you're taking the cost of a cloud machine, I'm talking about it being expensive. To be fair, the scenario is somebody adds cloud desktops and goes, oh my God, this bill is so much bigger than I expected. But had they shut down their data center, that probably would have been reasonable. Microsoft has to operate a data center and at a profit margin. But what's happening is things are being added on. So when you put your desktops in the cloud, do you shut down your data center? If you did, the economics would probably wash, right? So that's not something people tell you. It's cloud, cloud, cloud. It's magic. It's wonderful. But you got to just put away the mystique and the mystery and just go, what is every cost component of my environment? What is the experience required? Joel focusing on user experience, absolutely key. That's the key focus of my practice. I do highly technical implementations, but the real measure at the end of the day is user experience. And as Joel said, you have to have tools to see that and watch that. Users won't report it to you. You have to know quantifiably what's happening. And it isn't just red, green. User performance tools are user experience, launch times, responsiveness, right? So you got to look at the whole thing. Then you got to look at the landscape. There's company changes. There's acquisitions happening with Citrix and VMware. So, you know, the joke is if you ask a consultant how to do something, it says, it depends. I'll update that. In 2022, I think the answer is I don't know, because every situation has to be looked at factually, hard, cold facts. And I didn't expect to come to that, but listening to everybody and seeing the questions, I think you just have to start with a clean slate, look at your environment, your organization needs, the technology options. And I really like Jason reminding us to look at players who have proven themselves, because you can make a lot of promises, but who actually delivers at the end of the day? Rock solid solution. All right. Let's see what else we want. Any other thoughts on that before we move on? We're getting close to end of time here. In fact,
so many thoughts, Steve. So many thoughts. I'm thinking of air fryers again. I know that was a conversation we had earlier, but so many options.
Well, let me say what that is, and then because we're down to the last few minutes, I'll let you guys kind of do your final thoughts. Before we got on, we were just bantering, and it came up about buying a webcam or an air fryer and how hard that decision was in 2022 and how many options were out there. Now magnify that by 100. If you're a Citrix admin or engineer, you have 100 as many factors as an air fryer or a webcam. And I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but I do think you have to just assume you don't know and start over with what's on the table in front of you. Take each component. That would be my final thought. And Joel, you have a lot of thoughts, so you go first. Take a couple minutes.
Yeah, so I think that I kind of want to continue on that air fryer conversation, because I'm in the market for an air fryer, for those people who don't know, and I type in best air fryer right on Google, and I get like pages after pages of like similar content, right? But everybody has kind of like a different number 1, 2, 3. right? But they'll kind of like click on this link and we get a commission. And, you know, I think that in an ideal world, air fryers would be like software, right? When you are looking at technologies, try them out. Unfortunately, nobody's going to send me free air fryers. That would be nice, so I can like evaluate myself. But I do think that, you know, as EUC experts, or as, you know, take the opportunity to look at vendors and try out their technology. I think it's super important. If you're running into a vendor that says, no, you just have to pay me money and we'll come in to do it, now that's not good, right? Make sure that you take the time to evaluate the solutions yourself, because seeing is believing, and that makes you understand how it works, if it fits your use cases, and I think that is super critical for everybody on the call.
Thank you for that. That's try before you buy. Jason, you're up.
Sorry.
Oh no, go ahead, Adam. That's fine.
So this started with me ranting about my webcam quality, which some of you may have picked up on, and the fact that it's taken me over a year to not buy a webcam because I can't decide which one's got the best specs and I keep getting so confused. And I just wanted to highlight an article from Harvard Business Review called Sense Making for Sales. And it talks about how everyone seems to have high quality vendor-backed researched information on everything. And everything is just so confusing and so difficult. And it really resonated with me in my journey to purchase a webcam, and clearly Joel's mission to buy an air fryer. I don't know if Stephanie can find that article and pop it in the chat, but it's an interesting read. It's an interesting thing to see.
Great insight. Jason, take us out.
Yeah, I think that, you know, we talked a lot about user experience along the way. If you don't know what your user experience is today, and you don't have, you know, we helped coin that with Stratosphere UX in the industry, but there's other ways to do it right now. If you don't know what your user experience is today, you need to get a handle on that and see if your users are continuing to be productive, because you can't know where you're going later and compare it if you don't know today's user experience. A before and after picture, easy to do. Run in both environments before you choose to make any kind of moves in the future. And next, I want to say that, you know, nobody knows what the future holds, but we do know that the future holds change. If anything is of, you know, our experience in this industry has been, and change is speeding up, as Steve pointed out at the beginning. And if you look at Ray Kurzweil, the guy that invented the Kurzweil keyboard, his rule of innovation is that it is just getting more and more exponential, and that's continued to happen. So we know change is going to continue to occur, and you need to look at your stack and see if you are monolithically locked into a way of delivering apps. Are you monolithically locked in a way of knowing your user experience? Are you monolithically locked in providing the user environment? And Citrix gives you great solutions in that area, but there's ways to decouple that and to be ready for change at any moment, to use more of Citrix if you want. You know, change in an OS. You've got Windows 11 coming. Are you ready and prepared for that? Change in the way you deliver apps. Are you going to keep doing it on the server version, or are you going to put it into your desktop version? And is that going to work? Again, a change in OS. But the way, what I would leave my final thoughts is that I have 3 girls. One of them was a Brownie. None of them were Girl Scouts, and I realize the world has continued to evolve that to just Scouts in general. But they had a motto that I believe that they still use, and I learned it from my little Brownie Girl Scout who just started college this year. No longer a Brownie Girl Scout, but it was always be prepared. That's their motto, that you need to be prepared and you need to plan ahead, because change is coming. Change is consistent, and it's speeding up.
Okay, well, I'm going to interpret that and distill it down to, we can't really answer these questions. They are too complicated. Do your research, but in the end of the day, be prepared. Stephanie, if you want to take us out.
All right, let me see if I can get my last slide to pop up. Yeah, you did it. You know, sometimes when I come back with my camera and then I try to reshare my slides, it kind of freaks out. So I'm always happy for the little things. Thanks, you guys. Jason, I have a little Girl Scout who started college this year too. It was really weird.
Can't believe it.
But thank you so much. I think it was a really great conversation. I love these. I love just the free form part of them and how it just can go anywhere. And I think this was another great example of that. So I want to thank you all for participating today. It was great to have you guys on. And I will include the links that you guys shared. I'm going to make sure I capture that actually. I'll include that in the follow-up email and make sure that you guys get those links in that email in case you didn't catch them today. And I'm trying to find my chat. I'll find it in just a second. I also want to put the Women in Tech, there you go. There's the application link. If you know anybody that would want to be part of the mentorship, please share that. Or if you're a woman in tech working with Citrix, fill it out yourself. All right, and then I know some of you opted in for a chance to win a $100 Amazon gift card. So as soon as I close this webinar out, I'll pull the attendee report, use the random number generator, and we'll pick a winner. So look for an email from me on that. And basically, Adam, Joel, Jason, Steve, thank you so much for being here today. It was a really, really great conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks
Enjoyed
for having me.
All right, everybody, there, I found my chat log. I can save it. You have to do it before you close the webinar. It goes away. All right, thanks all, and have a great rest of your day, and I hope to see you at another CUGC event online or in person soon. Thanks, bye.
Thanks, bye.
That was fun.
Just